Nobody was supposed to survive the Viking Age. Not England, not France, not Ireland. And honestly, for about 200 years, they almost didn't. Because here's what most history classes never tell you. The Vikings weren't just raiders who showed up, grabbed some gold, and went home. Some of them had a much bigger plan. We're talking about men who looked at the most powerful kingdoms in Europe and thought, I could take that. And the terrifying part? They were right. A small group of Viking warlords came so close to seizing control of the entire continent that historians still argue about how different the world would look if they had succeeded. Today, we're going inside that story. The leaders, the campaigns, the moments where Europe held its breath, and the men who almost changed everything. The year is 793 AD. A small monastery sits on a tiny island off the northeast coast of England. Monks go about their morning prayers, completely unaware that wooden ships are cutting through the grey waters toward them. They never see it coming. By nightfall, Lindisfarne is in flames, bodies on the shore, gold stripped from the altars, the survivors dragged away in chains, and across Europe, nobody knows what just hit them. They didn't have a name for it yet. They didn't understand where these people came from, why they moved so fast, or how to stop them. All they knew was this: something had changed, because what began as a single raid on a defenseless island would eventually grow into the most sophisticated military campaign the medieval world had ever seen. Not one Viking, not one tribe, a generation of leaders, each one more dangerous than the last. Men who turned a culture of raiding into a strategy of conquest. Men who looked at the crumbling empires of Europe and saw opportunity. Over the next 20 minutes, we're going to walk through the lives of the Viking warlords who almost pulled it off, and ask the question historians are still debating today: how close did they actually get? For the first few decades, nobody in Europe took the Vikings seriously, and that was their first mistake. Because while Frankish kings were busy arguing over inheritance and English lords were squabbling over land, a new kind of leader was emerging in Scandinavia, different from anything the continent had seen before. His name was Ragnar Lothbrok. Now, historians argue about whether Ragnar was a real person or a legend built from the stories of several different men. But here's the thing, it doesn't matter, because whether Ragnar was one man or many, what he represented was absolutely real. A shift in Viking ambition. Before Ragnar, Viking raids were opportunistic, fast, local, hit a coastline, grab what you can, disappear before anyone responds. Ragnar changed the math. He wasn't interested in silver candlesticks from a monastery. He wanted cities. In 845 AD, he sailed up the Seine River with a fleet of 120 ships and roughly 5,000 warriors. And he didn't stop at the coastline. He kept going, all the way to Paris. The Frankish King Charles, known to history as Charles the Bold, which tells you everything you need to know about how his people felt about him, panicked. He split his army in two along opposite banks of the river. Ragnar attacked one side, slaughtered them, then hanged 111 prisoners on an island in the middle of the Seine, in full view of the other half of the Frankish army still watching from the opposite bank. The psychological message was deliberate. You cannot stop us. Charles paid him 7,000 pounds of silver to leave, and Ragnar left. Not because he had to, because he chose to. And that distinction, the idea that a Viking warlord could hold the most powerful kingdom in Europe hostage and walk away on his own terms, sent a message that echoed across the entire Norse world. If one man with 120 ships could do this, what could 100 leaders do? What could a generation do? The answer to that question would terrify Europe for the next 100 years. Ragnar showed Europe what was possible. His sons decided to finish the job. By the 860s, Ragnar was dead. The exact details are disputed, but the most enduring story says he was captured by the English king Ella of Northumbria and thrown into a pit of venomous snakes. Whether that's true or legend, what happened next was absolutely real. In 865 AD, the largest Viking army ever assembled landed on the shores of England. They didn't call it a raid. Called it the Great Heathen Army, and at its head, 3 of Ragnar's sons, Halfdan, Ubba, and the most feared of them all, Ivar the Boneless. Now, nobody is entirely sure what the boneless meant. Some historians think it referred to extreme flexibility, others think it was a mistranslation, some believe it pointed to a physical condition that made him appear different from other warriors. What everyone agrees on is this: Ivar was not a normal military commander. He was a strategist in a world that didn't yet have a word for strategy. While other Viking leaders relied on shock and speed, Ivar used something more dangerous: patience. He didn't just want to raid England, he wanted to dismantle it. Within a year, the Great Heathen Army had captured York, the second most important city in England. They killed King Ella, then they kept moving. Kingdom by kingdom, the Anglo-Saxon world began to collapse. Northumbria, East Anglia, Mercia, one by one they fell, were occupied, or were forced into humiliating peace agreements. By 870 AD, only one Anglo-Saxon kingdom remained unconquered: Wessex, and it was barely holding on. What Ivar and his brothers had achieved in 5 years was something no single force had accomplished in centuries. They had brought England to the edge of extinction. But here's where the story takes its first unexpected turn. Because England didn't fall, and the reason it didn't fall would produce one of the most famous figures in English history, a young king named Alfred. But that's a story for the next section, because first, while England was burning, something equally terrifying was happening on the other side of the continent. While England was fighting for survival, Europe was about to face something worse. Remember that opening image, 700 ships on the Seine? That wasn't a raid, that was the Viking endgame. The year is 885 AD. A warlord named Sigfrid has assembled the largest Viking fleet in history, somewhere between 700 and 800 ships carrying an estimated 30,000 to 40,000 men. To put that in perspective, the entire population of Paris at the time was around 20,000 people. The Vikings had more warriors than the city had citizens. Sigfrid's demand was simple: let us pass through Paris and continue down the Seine into the heart of France. The answer came from a single man standing on the bridge tower, a bishop named Goslin. No, that single word from a churchman with no military training triggered a siege that would last almost a year. What followed was one of the most brutal military engagements of the medieval world. The Vikings attacked with everything they had: battering rams, fire ships, siege towers built overnight from freshly cut timber. The Parisians fought back with boiling oil, arrows, and sheer desperation. Wave after wave crashed against those walls, and Paris held, not because the Frankish Empire sent help, they didn't, not fast enough, but because a small garrison of defenders refused to break. For 11 months, Paris absorbed the full force of the Viking war machine, and here is where the story becomes genuinely extraordinary. When the Frankish Emperor Charles the Fat finally arrived with a relief army, outnumbering the Vikings significantly, he didn't fight. He negotiated, he paid Sigfrid off, gave the Vikings permission to raid Burgundy instead, and retreated. His own people were so disgusted that within a year he was deposed and died in humiliation. But here's what that moment really meant. The Vikings hadn't taken Paris, but they had done something arguably more powerful. They had exposed the Frankish Empire as hollow, the greatest political structure in Western Europe. The successor to Charlemagne's dream had cracked under pressure, and one Viking leader watching from the edges of that chaos took note of everything he saw. His name was Rollo, and he had a different plan entirely: not to destroy Europe, to become it. Most Viking leaders wanted wealth, some wanted conquest. Rollo wanted something nobody saw coming. He wanted legitimacy. He was a man who had spent years raiding the Frankish coastline, burning villages, taking slaves, collecting silver. A warrior so physically enormous that legend says no horse could carry him, so he walked into battle on foot. And yet, Rollo was watching. While other Vikings fought and bled for treasure they would sail home with, Rollo was studying the Frankish world from the inside, how they governed, how they held power, how they kept land, and he reached a conclusion that would change the shape of Europe permanently. Raiding was temporary, owning was forever. In 911 AD, Rollo sat down with the Frankish king, Charles the Simple, yes, another unfortunate nickname, and negotiated one of the most consequential deals in medieval history, the Treaty of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte. Charles gave Rollo a vast stretch of land along the northern coast of France. In exchange, Rollo agreed to 3 things: Stop raiding Frankish territory, defend the coast from other Vikings, convert to Christianity. Rollo agreed, and then he did something that genuinely shocked the Viking world.
He has sold us out to the Frank!
He meant it. He didn't take the land and disappear. He didn't raid and ignore his promises. He settled, he governed, he built. The territory Charles handed him would eventually become known as Normandy, the land of the Northmen.
And within 2 generations, Rollo's descendants had so completely absorbed Frankish culture that they were more French than Viking. They spoke French, they built cathedrals, they adopted feudal law. 150 years later, Rollo's great-great-great-grandson would sail across the English Channel with an army of knights and conquer England in a single afternoon. His name was William. History remembers him as the conqueror, but the Viking ambition that put him on the English throne began with Rollo, a man who realized the most powerful thing a Viking could do wasn't destroy Europe, it was become it. While Rollo was learning how to become French, England was learning how to fight back, and it almost didn't happen. In 878 AD, the Viking leader Guthrum launched a winter surprise attack on Wessex, the last unconquered Anglo-Saxon kingdom. Winter, deliberately chosen, because no one fought in winter. The attack worked. King Alfred of Wessex, the man who would become the only English monarch in history ever called the Great, was caught completely off guard. He fled, not a strategic retreat, a desperate, humiliating escape into the marshes of Somerset with a handful of followers. For weeks, the King of England hid in a swamp. There is a famous story, almost certainly embellished, of Alfred sheltering with a peasant woman who asked him to watch her cakes baking over the fire. He let them burn, too lost in thought about his shattered kingdom to notice. Whether that story is true or not, the image captures something real. This was a broken man trying to figure out if there was any way back. Turns out there was. Alfred spent those weeks in the marshes doing something no Anglo-Saxon king had done before. He thought, not about how to match the Vikings on their terms, but about how to beat them on his own. He emerged from the marshes in the spring with a reconstituted army, and at the Battle of Edington, he didn't just defeat Guthrum, he destroyed him. But here is where Alfred did something extraordinary. He didn't execute Guthrum, he baptized him, made him a Christian, made him a godson, gave him land, and then negotiated a formal border, the Danelaw, dividing England between Viking territory in the north and Anglo-Saxon territory in the south. It was a masterstroke, because Alfred understood something the Viking leaders hadn't fully grasped yet. Military victory alone doesn't hold territory. You need law, infrastructure, fortified towns, a navy. Alfred built all of it. He created a network of defended settlements across Wessex, the first planned defensive urban system in English history. He built a fleet specifically to intercept Viking ships before they could reach shore. He reformed the military so that half his forces were always in the field, while the other half rested. For the first time, the Vikings were facing an enemy who had studied them, and it showed. By the time Alfred died in 899 AD, Wessex was not just surviving, it was winning. His son would retake the Danelaw. His grandson would become the first king of a unified England. The Viking plan for England had failed. But the story wasn't over, because one Viking leader was about to do something that nobody, not Ragnar, not Ivar, not Rollo, not Siegfried, had ever actually achieved. He was going to build a Viking empire, a real one. His name was Cnut, and for a brief extraordinary moment in history, he did what every Viking leader before him had only dreamed of. He built an empire, a real one. By 1016 AD, the Viking Age had been raging for over 2 centuries. England had been fought over, divided, raided, settled, and reclaimed so many times that the country barely knew what stability felt like anymore. Cnut arrived in England with a Danish fleet and a simple intention: he was going to take it all, and within a year, he did. At the Battle of Asandun in 1016, Cnut defeated the English King Edmund Ironside so decisively that Edmund agreed to split the kingdom. Then Edmund died, of natural causes, most historians believe, conveniently, within weeks of signing the agreement. And just like that, Cnut was King of England, but he wasn't finished. In 1018, he became King of Denmark. In 1028, he conquered Norway. By 1030, Cnut the Great, son of a Danish king, descendant of Norse warriors, ruled an empire spanning the entire North Sea, England, Denmark, Norway, parts of Sweden, the most powerful ruler in Northern Europe. But here is what makes Cnut genuinely fascinating. He didn't rule like a Viking, he ruled like a king. He kept English law largely intact. He governed through existing structures. He married an English queen. He went on pilgrimage to Rome and wrote letters home to his subjects explaining what he had negotiated on their behalf. He wanted to be seen, not as a conqueror, but as a legitimate monarch. Sound familiar? It was the same instinct that had driven Rollo a century earlier. The most dangerous Viking leaders weren't the ones who wanted to destroy civilization, they were the ones who wanted to run it. For 18 years, Cnut held his empire together through a combination of military genius, political intelligence, and sheer force of personality. Then in 1035, he died. He was 30-something years old, and without him, everything collapsed. His sons fought over the inheritance. The empire fractured within a decade. England slipped away. Norway was lost. The North Sea Empire, the closest thing the Viking world ever produced to a lasting political superstructure, simply ceased to exist, and with it went the last realistic chance of a Viking-dominated Europe. But the story doesn't end there, because one final act was still to come. The last great Viking leader was about to make one last throw of the dice, and it would end, as so many Viking stories end, in one catastrophic, defining battle. His name was Harald Hardrada, and if you had to pick one word to describe him, it would be this: unstoppable. Harald had spent his entire life doing things that shouldn't have been possible. At 15, he fought at the Battle of Stiklestad, survived, fled Norway as a fugitive, spent years as a mercenary across Russia and the Byzantine Empire, eventually commanding the legendary Varangian Guard, the elite Viking warrior unit that protected the Emperor of Constantinople himself. He fought in battles across Bulgaria, Sicily, and the Middle East. He accumulated so much gold that contemporaries called him the last great Viking king. And in 1066, at nearly 50 years old, he decided he wanted one more thing: England. Harald assembled a fleet of around 300 ships and landed in the north of England with roughly 10,000 men. He crushed the English Northern Army at the Battle of Fulford. York surrendered within days. It looked, for one brief electric moment, like the Viking story was going to have a different ending after all. Then came September 25th, 1066, the Battle of Stamford Bridge. The English king Harold Godwinson had marched his army 185 miles in 4 days, one of the most extraordinary forced marches in medieval military history, and arrived before Harold had even reassembled his full force. The Vikings were caught off guard. Many had left their armor at the ships. What followed was a brutal, bloody, catastrophic defeat. Harald Hardrada, the last great Viking conqueror, died on that field with an arrow through his throat. Of the 300 ships that had arrived, only 24 sailed home, and just 3 days later, as if history itself was turning a page, William of Normandy landed on the southern coast of England, the grandson of Rollo, the Viking who had learned to become French. 3 weeks after that, at the Battle of Hastings, the exhausted English army, the same men who had just destroyed the last Viking invasion in the north, was defeated. England fell, not to a Viking, to a Norman, to the descendant of a Viking. And that, right there, is the extraordinary, almost poetic irony at the heart of this entire story.
The Vikings never took Europe by force, but one Viking family line, starting with Rollo, running through generations of Norman dukes, reshaped England, influenced the French monarchy, and eventually produced crusader kingdoms all the way to the Middle East. They didn't conquer Europe, they became Europe.